Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Gone with the Wind. This film came out in 1939, and it was directed by several people, a little bit by George Cukor and Sam Wood, but the majority of it was directed by Victor Fleming. And I'm sure some of you who saw this review were probably rolling your eyes because this movie is a movie that has been talked about over and over and over again. It is an iconic classic, but it has a reputation for being one of the great Hollywood accomplishments, at least in terms of scale. And there's a film like this in every generation, I think. I mean, Gone with the Wind was for my grandmother's generation what maybe Titanic was for my generation. And those films are similar in so many ways, but I think the key difference between them is that the romantic leads in Gone with the Wind are actually interesting. Yeah, I said it. This film came out in the golden age of Hollywood, where so many films were just exploding with ambition and success. I mean, this film came out the same year as films like Wizard of Oz, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Stagecoach, etc. And at the time, Gone with the Wind was considered the most expensive film, or one of the most expensive films ever made, and it was based on a very, very popular book of the same name at the time, so it had a lot to live up to. And for anyone who doesn't know, this film is about Scarlett O'Hara. She's a Southern belle, and this film follows her life through the Civil War and beyond. A lot of the turmoil that's going on in the country is affecting her directly, but it's also kind of mirroring her own life in terms of her relationships. And you see her grow through the different men in her life and just the different people, the friends and the foes. So this is very much a coming-of-age story, and even though this film continues to be a critical darling, I'm not going to say that it succeeds on every level, because it doesn't. I admit that I absolutely love this movie, but there is a lot of it that does not hold up for me. It's a very melodramatic piece, which is fine. I mean, that's its style. But sometimes that can be a bit of a detriment. There are a few kind of forced plot devices and some contrived side characters, and so much of the film is very dated and kind of cringeworthy in terms of the way that it depicts certain minorities. But I will say that what this film does do well, it does extremely well. You know, take the idea of racism in the film. You know, this film was made in the 1930s, which was basically a terrible time in America to be anything other than a white male. This really shows in the way that they depict slavery in the antebellum South. And I understand that this film obviously is depicting a period where racism in America was probably at its peak. But this film stereotypes many of African-American characters and actors, I think, very unfairly, especially the character of Prissy, which is just an extremely offensive character. Really just annoying and hard to watch, and I can understand why the actress who played her was quite offended by what she had to do in the film. But then there's also the character Mammy, who is played by Hattie McDaniel, and she plays the part with a very wise sensitivity. She's not just a housemaid in the film. She is Scarlett's confidant. She is a maternal figure in her life. But she also understands how Scarlett's mind works, and she knows how to get to her and how to put her in her place when she needs it. And I feel that the character is somewhat realistic to the period, but there's a lot of nuance in the writing, and I think that's a huge reason why McDaniel went on to win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, and she was the first African-American to do so. At that time, there were very few movies that depicted any sort of minorities, any African-Americans, with any dimension whatsoever. I think that the character of Mammy is a step in the right direction, even though a lot of the characters around her aren't treated with the same gravitas or just respect. And there are still some very unforgettable, very powerful moments in this movie that are iconic images in Hollywood film, and they really do stay with you. Part of why I really admire this film is because even when I don't think it necessarily succeeds, it does everything with such bravura and such confidence that you can't help but be a bit moved by it. Even though it's a film that has a huge budget and it's obviously has tons of characters and it's on a large scale, it feels very rooted in emotion and in its core themes. You never forget the heart of the story, which is the romantic relationship, I think, between Rhett and Scarlett. Scarlett is played by the remarkable Vivien Leigh, and I think she's absolutely extraordinary in this film, and she's in almost every scene, and this film is almost 4 hours long, so you have to have a really, really great actress. And she is just that. She is absolutely electrifying in this role. She just has this spark, this fire in her eyes and this grit, yet she has that ability to be vulnerable when she needs to. And Scarlett is the kind of person who you could easily hate, and yet you don't, because Vivien is able to show all of that dimension. I mean, she is a very feisty woman, but she's also so flawed. She's extremely manipulative, she's immature, she's selfish, and she'll do just about anything to get what she wants. But it's that gutsiness and that determination she has that I think really resonates with the viewers. She represents that symbol of bravery in America, especially during the Civil War, and that symbol can translate to pretty much any period of hardship during American history, and it would still have the same appeal. And she's wonderful just on her own as a character, but her relationship with Rhett Butler, played with ridiculous charisma by Clark Gable, is what really makes the film juicy, and it's also what helps make the film kind of modern. The first half of the film covers Scarlett's early years and the decline of the Civil War, which feels very traditionally made. It's a solid opening to the film, but it's the second half of the film which covers the aftermath of the war, as well as Scarlett's marriage to Rhett, which is surprisingly complex because you're really getting into the psychology of these very dynamic characters and how, even though they are so similar in a lot of ways, they just don't work as a couple. Rhett understands her like nobody else ever did, and he recognizes a lot of who she is in himself, and perhaps that sense of naivete and that brashness within her is kind of alluring to him. And maybe he kind of unfairly romanticizes those characteristics in her, and he gets angry when she tries to fight that notion. Scarlett is such a stubborn person, and her big problem is that she knows that Rhett knows her better than anybody else, but that's why she refuses to expose that vulnerability any further. She never wants to appear weak, and even though he is more maybe emotionally involved than she is because he's older and more mature, I think that he has difficulty with that as well. Watching a very intriguing relationship slowly crumble is difficult to watch, but it's also just one of the most interesting Hollywood couples on screen that I've seen. But the big conflict of the film is a key reason why their relationship doesn't work, and that's the fact that ever since Scarlett was a teenager, she was in love with another man, Ashley Wilkes. And Ashley Wilkes is an extremely different person than Rhett Butler is. He's very honorable and earnest and very kind-natured, and she sees in him that image of idealism, that kind of perfect man. He unknowingly stands between Scarlett and any chance of true happiness just because she is so obsessed with something that is completely unattainable, an idea. That's another reason why I find the film to be so appealing. It's because this is not just a story of a woman that's representing American strength through turmoil. I think that would make it seem one note. It's the fact that she is a very flawed person, like all of us. She's always chasing something that she doesn't even really understand why she loves so much. She's always looking towards the prize rather than appreciating what she has. And when she finally does realize what she has, it's too late. And I think that in itself is what is so appealing for me, and it's kind of a layered commentary on the American way. Even though this film has some deep flaws in it, I can't help but really admire it. I do emotionally connect with it. It's one of those movies where if I just happen to be doing nothing on a weekend and I see it on TV, I have to watch the whole thing. I just have to, because it's so interesting. It's one of those movies that I think almost anybody can enjoy on a certain level. But anyway, that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page and the link below that one. Catch you next time.